Welcome to this very special Fane online event with me, Hannah Hutchins-Giorgio, and the award-winning Egyptian author, Youssef Rakha. Youssef is a writer of fiction and non-fiction working in Arabic and English. He is the author of the novels The Book of the Sultan's Seal, published by Interlink, and The Crocodiles, published by Seven Stories Press, as well as Paolo, which was on the long list of the International Prize for Arabic Fiction in 2017 and won the 2017 Sawaris Award. The Dissenters is his first novel to be written in English and is published by Grey Wolf in the US and by Peninsula Press here in the UK. Youssef was among the 39 best Arab writers under 40 selected for the Hay Festival Beirut 39 event in 2010. His work has appeared in publications such as The Atlantic, Bomb, The Dial, The Kenyan Review, The New York Times, Ploughshares, and many others. Youssef's writing has been widely anthologized and translated also. So, on to the Dissenters. Amna, Nimo, Mouna. These are all names for a single Egyptian woman whose life has mirrored that of her country. After her death in 2015, her son Nour climbs to the attic of their house where he glimpses her in a series of ever more immersive visions. Amna as a young woman forced into an arranged marriage in the 1950s, as a coquettish student of French known to her confidants as Nimo, as a self-made divorcee and a lover, as a pious mama donning her hijab, and finally as a feminist activist during the Arab Spring. Charged by these visions of a woman he has always known as Mouna, Nour begins a series of fevered letters to his sister, Shimo, in an attempt to reconcile what both siblings know about this mercurial woman, their country, and the possibility for true evolution after so much has failed. Described as a tremendous, confident novel by Bina Shah and a stylish, deftly told story about a stubbornly cosmopolitan and nonconformist set of characters by Amitav Ghosh, The Dissenters is a transcendent portrait of a woman and an era that explodes our ideas of faith, gender roles, freedom, and political agency. So, to celebrate the UK edition of the novel published by Peninsula Press, Youssef and I will be talking about the development of his first English language novel, writing in and about revolutionary times and acts of dissent, how his work as a literary translator, poet, cultural journalist, teacher, and photographer have shaped his fictional output to date, and much, much more. So welcome, Youssef. Thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from
Thank you,
Cairo
Hannah.
as well. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm going to jump right into the questions, but again, if we move away from them, that's absolutely fine. Um,
Hmm.
we've had a few exchanges, and you know how obsessed I was with the structure of the novel, the use of domestic space. The novel is sort of divided into four parts, three of which are structured around space: the attic, the veranda, and the roof. And this for me is incredibly loaded and deeply symbolic. These sites are really evocative and very erotic too for the characters and for other sort of supporting characters that we meet later on in the novel. Also, even though it's a historical novel and a very political novel, I felt like there were elements of the Gothic because these spaces are sort of haunted, or at least Noor experiences them as such. There's sort of residues of the past and memories that he sort of taps into in different spaces. So I just wondered, like, why domestic space? Why the metaphor of the house and the household?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I mean, thank you for the introduction and for the incredibly deep reading that you've undertaken. Um, so I wasn't actually thinking consciously about the figurative or mythical aspect of the house as such. The house was mainly, in my mind, at least at the beginning, the house was mainly a setting.
Mm,
And but I did let myself imagine things happening in various parts of the house
mm,
in a way that reflected the emotional situations. And what was happening to the characters inside and out. And so it's extremely satisfying and wonderful to find that somebody like yourself will uh, read all of this into the spatial arrangement of the novel, which kind of happened only half consciously or subconsciously
Mm,
as I was writing. I think that's interesting though, because in my work, the distinction between space and time has been has been quite pronounced, and I've always thought that I was writing about space. I had always thought that I was writing about space, and only recently I kind of discovered that my true subject, my deeper subject, is the passage of time. But I
mm,
think, but I think in the way that time is depicted in this book in particular, it's really linked with the space, with the domestic space where these people live. A lot of the book is about their relationships and how families function.
mm,
Um, this idea that there is no family that isn't dysfunctional in some way, and but the dysfunction is used in this case to talk about the deeper issues of the society as a whole and the
mm,
country, and how those were formed by history and historical events. So the house was actually based on a real house in Maadi that belonged to the late Alaa Deeb, who was one of my earliest mentors. He was a novelist and a sort of cultural journalist and quite an influential figure in his time. In I mean, starting in the 60s, but I knew him in the late 90s and onward. And he had this house in Maidi that was struck me at the time as very spare, very austere in a way, even though it was quite beautiful. And people would gather there, but because he kind of adopted me, I got to go there at other times as well, and I got to explore the house. And there
mm,
was something of the Gothic about it, in the sense that there were sort of hidden spaces and weird unexpected passageways and such. Uh, and so that's the house I was thinking of, but I wasn't necessarily thinking of that these were figures for the sort of the psyches of the characters, even though because I was thinking of the psyches of the characters, then they obviously they kind of automatically became those figures. And then when I was structuring the book towards the very end, it seemed it seemed the right thing to do to sort of identify these um, uh, these particular spots in the house, but also as spots in life in general.
mm.
There's the attic, and then there's the veranda and the roof. I mean, the roof isn't so much this particular house, but the roof
Yeah.
is very significant for obvious reasons. Um, so so that kind of reinforced the idea that this was a figure for something deeper. And yeah, and I'm really happy that came through.
Yeah, it definitely did. For me, it was structuring the sort of the politics that were the politics of the novel, but also the political shifts and turns that were happening outside of the house too. It that a house is something that you could say is neutral and static, but it isn't. These spaces shape us as well, and I felt like yeah, there were such loaded areas in the house, and even the objects sometimes that you listed. I think the not the dining room, but there was a room where Amna sits at a table and there's not much light, and sometimes there's white
Yes,
light
yes.
that sort of frames her that and Nour sort of sees her with a big sort of yellow legal pad, and it just
Yeah.
so many things that feel quite symbolic, so many images in these spaces that yeah, really sort of yeah added to it and made it more layered. Just indulge me with one more question about space before we move away from this. As you know, I said about the basement in my questions. we get access to the attic and all the shenanigans that happen up there.
Hmm.
And we're sometimes on the veranda with Amna, and we definitely go onto the roof with her and the jumpers, who we'll
Hmm.
talk about in a bit. But the basement feels like a space that's cut off, and that's the sort of domain of her husband, Armin, if I'm pronouncing his name
I
correctly.
mean,
I mean, yeah, and he's been a political prisoner, and when he
mhm.
comes out of prison, that's sort of the area that he kind of frequents the most. I think there's a scene with him in the attic, but there's that's the sort of space that he goes to retreat, I'd say, to maybe
Yeah.
gather himself. We don't know. And for me, it became very symbolic of maybe any areas that the reader and you are shut off from. This is out of bounds. We cannot go there. We cannot know this. There's so much we can know, but there's also, an element where repression becomes literal on the page, as well as, a spatial issue. I just sort of wondered more about this basement and, if it was this symbol for repression and prohibition, maybe.
Well, for me, I mean, it obviously works in that way too, as a symbol for repression or the unsaid, the unsayable.
Yeah.
But for me, it was more about banishment in the sense that Amin goes there when Amna kicks him out of her life
Yeah.
as kind of as slightly delayed punishment for him leaving her by being this communist activist who ends up in prison for 6 years or however long. But it's also obviously where he goes in his despair. So he in his despair of the first revolution, the 52 revolution,
Mm,
uh, transforming the country in any way that he desires, and also in his despair of the house that he built, because he also built the house. And this is another. I mean, I should have said this in answer to the first question. It's kind of the myth of Amna, or the myth of the family, is established when he builds the house, and for the two of them, right?
yeah.
Um, so the house isn't the kind of house that he had imagined, the kind of idealistic, progressive house. It becomes, by the time he kind of disappears into the basement, it's become a very sort of pseudo or wannabe bourgeois, middle class religious household,
Yeah.
thanks to Amna's transformations. And he is totally alienated by that, but he's also totally alienated by what's happened to the country. So there's this constant there. I mean, it occurs to me right now that there's this constant sort of echo of what's happening on a public, on a large, national scale, in what's happening um, to these people within the family, right, and within the domestic space. And I think I was conscious of that mostly as far as Amna was concerned. I wasn't necessarily thinking about how public events and sort of historical moments were reflected in other people's in other characters' psyches. But I guess that sort of not naturally happened, or automatically happened. I mean, definitely with Amin, because he's such an archetypal figure, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm interested. I don't know. We can continue to talk about the house, of course, but when you say the politics of the novel, I'm really interested in your take on that, which wasn't really explained in the notes, because recently an Arab American reader who evidently really liked the book, in her review said something like she couldn't she couldn't work out what the political message was, or if there was a political message. And this to me was extremely provocative in a
Mm,
you know, in a generative way. So I'm just wondering if you what politically did you
yeah.
get out of the book? Yeah.
I'm that putting me on the spot. I am not the most sort of politically aware and astute person, and I also, when reading this, felt like I needed to definitely educate myself more, because when the Arab Spring was occurring. I wasn't the youngest person, but I felt like it. Various events were happening, and I was watching things on television, and obviously we get stuff over here, and it's kind of framed in a particular way, and
Yeah.
you think this is some of it's horrific, and also wow, how empowering, and it's all happening so quickly, and then you know the media moves on to something else, and this novel really made me sit and think about how people live, about how people go about their day-to-day lives with the heat of these things going on. And
Hmm.
this is not all that's happening. Of course, you still have to get up, you still have to meet your friend for lunch, all of I just thought all of that was incredibly beautiful. For me, the political core, I think it's in the later question about dissent and small acts of self-autonomy, that you are skeptical about maybe how some of these revolutions, how some of the protests, how people came together, and what how it became weaponized or turned into something else. You're
Yeah.
skeptical of the outcomes, but what people try and hold true to in terms of themselves, and how they live that even under, you know, authoritarian regimes, oppression, censorship, all kinds of things. That's the power. That's the sort of political power. That's the
Yeah.
personal
Yeah.
political power. That for me was what really mattered. All those acts of self-assertion and autonomy with clandestine relationships, and and there's so many small details. I think uh, Fifi's the way Fifi lives in particular, quietly queer, maybe not so quietly at various points in the novel, but quietly queer, and still insisting on reaching out for what she wants and needs. Uh, yeah, all these acts of self-definition. That for me was the power of the political core. I don't know if I'm getting it right, but that
No, you, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so
yeah.
much. I mean,
But
I'm just
it's much more than that. But this is what struck me. These are really nuanced, complicated characters with warts and all, but also beauty spots too.
Mhm.
And I just, yeah, this is the kind of literature I want to read. This is the sort of, yeah, it's really powerful representation of people's lives.
It's really
Yeah.
incredibly delightful the way you responded to this, but the way you have been responding to this book. It really, really makes me happy, honestly, because this is exactly the sort of engagement that I would want from a
Yeah.
reader, and not necessarily somebody who knows anything about the Middle East or Egypt, which I'm not saying that you don't know, but I'm just saying,
No, I
it
think,
doesn't
yeah.
it doesn't it's not it doesn't presuppose knowledge of this part of the world necessarily at all. And
No.
actually, some of the most annoying readings uh, that I've had have been from people who are familiar with this part of the world, and because obviously they're involved and they have their views and whatever. So
Mm,
so um so yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand there is a certain degree of skepticism or even despair of sort of political action in the with a capital with capital letters,
mm,
but at the same time, it's the realization that we do resist, and we are constantly sort of in a day-to-day way, uh, sort of bouncing between a reactionary position or just accepting oppression, and revolution. So there are all these tiny little revolutions that are going on all the time. And I was really interested in the wake of the Arab Spring in the long term, especially. I was really interested in the way that the historical revolution or events that were called that managed to obscure and sometimes work against
mm,
these little daily revolutions. So there's all kinds of conflicts going on, and I think I freed myself. I mean, I think that the person who said she couldn't she couldn't find a clear political stance in the book, did is definitely onto something in the sense that I freed myself from any kind of political loyalties
Mm.
or debts, so that I could try and see, or I could try and construct this view, which is obviously not necessarily identical to reality. I mean, the Cairo in the book and even these relations and whatever might not be 100% sort of plausible, but they do say something plausible about the real life equivalent, right? Um, there was something else I wanted to say. The Yeah, the lesson of it when you talk about authoritarian regimes and living under oppression and whatever. I mean, I think the lesson of the last 15 years or so is that we are all living under authoritarian regimes. There are no regimes that are not authoritarian. I mean, there are different ways of managing things, and there are obviously places that have more money and more sophistication than other places. But I think we're facing the same sort of global reality where a certain kind of money powered and money dependent oppression is meted out to us all to varying degrees, you know, depending on where we happen to be and you know what sort of tribe we happen to have born into to have been born into, right? Um, So yeah, so I think also the framing, I mean, to tell the story of the Arab Spring from an Egyptian perspective and from a critical Egyptian perspective, I think that was important to me, and I think it took that long. I mean, the book I did it took a few years to find a publisher and to get things going and whatever. But uh, but I didn't really start writing this until maybe 3, 4 years after I'd sort of assimilated events, and it really does take that long. So by the time I was editing the final version, it had been, I don't know, over 10 years since the initial events, and I think that what tends to happen in the publishing industry is people, you know, something will happen, something will be big in the news, and then within a year everything will have been said about this, which is obviously something, you know, I mean, literature and art doesn't work that way, right? But then once a year has passed, nobody's interested anymore. Like
Yeah.
they want it to happen like right now, and obviously it doesn't work that way, uh, partly because you yourself sort of evolve. I mean, one of the things that I was really keen on getting across, I mean, consciously keen on getting across in the book, is the way history affects people. I mean, even physically affects people, like the way we walk around carrying historical events, right? Uh, and I mean, if you think about somebody from Gaza, for example, who has presumably survived, uh, maybe like somebody who's like 10 or 12 now, and you think of their body, what their body will carry for the rest of their lives, you know, I mean, this is so fascinating to me, the way that history enters not just our daily lives, but actually our bodies, our our physical functions, right? Uh, so yeah, so on the one hand, it took that long, and on the other hand, it was very satisfying to be able to contend with the predominant narrative, which is actually not so different in certain point, like in the pro revolution circles in the Arab world, it's practically the same uh, narrative as the West, right? Because it's liberal or neoliberal, and and to really critique that in a way that doesn't involve me saying, "Look, you're wrong because of X, Y, Z," but in a way that, you know, to dramatize, to like orchestrate why this narrative is not true, like why things are different and more complex and more complicated, was definitely one of the most important things. So I mean, for me, in a way, it's extremely political, right? And that's why it was so provocative when that person said uh, she wasn't sure if there was politics in the book. I mean, the whole thing is politics,
Yeah,
right? It's and I'm not. I mean, I totally respect. I mean, I'm not sort of taking issue with what she said, but I was just interested in what she meant by politics because I think that in the Arab Spring, as in a lot of sort of online activism and Western American and Western sort of political discourse, politics tends to reduce to um, sort of signaling very specific positions on very specific things, which is fine, as far as it goes. I don't think it's particularly fruitful. Uh, I'm certainly not against it, but I mean, but I think that political consciousness or having like acquiring developing a political position on something and on something as complex as the Arab Spring is cannot depend on or even involve simple sort of
absolutely.
Mhm.
And you've created the perfect main character, heroine. She's the most complex and layered. She's got three personalities, not three names.
Mm.
Sort of personhood that I keep saying tripartite personhood in my notes, which sounds
Yeah,
ridiculously academic, but just so many layers to the point where she has these three different names that signal different identities. But it's not like she is one minute and another the next. She's
no,
all of this at once because we're many things as individuals, and um and I love what you said earlier about carrying history in our bodies, on a cellular level. I think both Amna and Amin do carry things on a
yeah,
cellular level. They
yeah,
have physical health problems as a
mm,
result of it, neurological problems. I think Armin he's not as jittery when he first comes out of prison, but that's
hmm,
a sign of him being, he's very frail, and he's had everything knocked out of him
yeah,
through violence that he's had to survive. And that sort of him recovering, I mean, you can't recover from that, but sort of acclimatizing to being out of prison, that is that journey, that change occurs through the body. Your descriptions of his body, uh, how he interacts with Amna as well, uh,
hmm,
the lack of intimacy between them as well, or intimacy just to have children, or rare moments where they have intimate.
yeah,
You're right. It's all, we talk about the space of the house, but it's the space of the body where everything is really.
hmm,
Um, I wanted to talk more about Amna, Mouna, Nimo.
hmm,
It's just brilliant. She is brilliant. She's a survivor. I saw everything that she did, for better or worse, is an attempt to survive.
yeah,
It's an attempt to have some control over herself. Even her, mama hijab wearing,
hmm,
overtly extreme religious, throwing herself into something to try and have some control over herself in the world, herself in a very shifting, changing Egypt.
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Where did this character appear from? This really complex, nuanced.
Mm.
Mm.
Okay, so initially it was my mother,
Yeah,
um, and I say this with a great amount of trepidation because I don't think she likes to be identified with that character, even though she's on the cover. I mean, the cover, the American cover is a photo of her before I was born, and I think some of the sort of the biographical detail does uh, uh, is, is true of her life. Um, but the further along I went in the book, the more I realized that this was not so much my mother as me, as a version of me who may have lived my mother's life. And and this became very interesting and very complicated. And this is partly the reason that I kind of devised I went for the device of the visions that Nour, who is a kind of stand-in for me in a way as the narrator, uh, has visions of his mother. so she becomes this person in his visions, right? She's
Mm.
not she's not this person independently necessarily. I mean, within the world of the book, she's not necessarily independently uh, that person independently of the visions that he has. Um, but also the greatest source of inspiration or model or whatever is the country itself. So the idea of the motherland in Egypt is very strong, and of Egypt as a mother who cares for her children, who must care for her children, and that sort of is projected both ways. So in sort of nationalist patriotic discourse, and sometimes to actually actively oppress people, you will talk about your duty to the mother, right? And how the mother nurtured you and brought you into the world, and you are worth nothing without the mothers. So there's that sort of direction, but also in the other direction, in the sense that you feel towards the homeland the way you feel towards your mother. You have this, and it's a very strong trope in Egyptian culture. I mean, not this is not true, I don't think, of Arab culture and or Muslim culture to the same extent. I mean, I think this is a very Egyptian thing. This sort of deification of the mother,
Mm.
mythologization of the mother, um, and uh, and so if you want to tell the story of the country, uh, y- and you're telling it through the story of a mother, then you might as well not you might as well, you really have to make that a very complicated character, right? And a very layered character, and you have to have stages in that woman's life in the way that you've had stages in the country's history. So there's this constant sort of play of the mother as a figure, as a figure signifying homeland or nation, or and the mother, and the actual mother who nurtures, who emotionally, psychologically nurtures children, uh, but who has suffered so much herself
Mm.
that she inadvertently passes on all of these horrors as well, right? So it's not like she's a good mother. I think she's a very good mother in as far as that goes, but she's obviously also passed on. So yeah, so there's my mother, like, and being inspired by the character of my mother, which is, I mean, some of my mother's humor and some of my mother's resilience is in that character, but not so much her politics or the way she's lived, or adventurousness, or you know
Mm.
but that's a separate issue. So anyhow, so there's like my mother, and then there's the motherland, and then there's something else as well, which is um motherhood as the idea that to be a man, to be an Egyptian man, what
Mm.
that really means is that you're a woman's son,
Mm.
and sort of an acknowledgement of that, um a confession that,
Mm.
because again, I mean, so much of sort of patriarchal discourse in the Arab Muslim world is that doesn't deny womanhood, and doesn't attack womanhood, but does not acknowledge the connection. It does not see itself as a product of womanhood. In fact, it would probably perceive that as an insult.
Mm.
So one like a very common insult in Egyptian Arabic is to call somebody a woman's son,
Wow.
which is which is fascinating, considering that people actually stick the word "my mother" on the backs of their cars as a way of,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So there's
Yeah.
both there's both these things, but a woman's son is not a mother's son. So a woman is not necessarily a mother, but that's kind of lost in the in the hypocrisy or the contradictions of the culture, that a mother has to be a woman first, you know, and a mother, in order to become a mother, has to go through certain things, you know, including sex, including hopefully desire,
Yeah,
including including suffering, including pain. She has to tie herself, I mean, in most cases, she has to tie herself up with a particular man who will have his own problems, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, so I would say like three Amna, there are like three Amnas, three sort of platonic Amnas. One is uh, my a certain kind of vision, a certain kind of idealization of my actual mother. Another is Egypt as a mother, and a third is the man's the source of manhood. If
wow.
it, I mean, if that's not a very articulate way of saying it,
You
but
add a fourth because I feel like the creativity of the novel is incredibly creative. You know, there's your imagination and skill married together uh, is off the scale. I feel, you know, we've got Nour's letters to Shimo narrating the visions that he has of his mother. Then we have Amna or Mouna or Nimo's narration in the middle as well. Like we actually get her
Mhm.
voice, which I loved, and it was clearly her voice. And then we go back to Nour. We have, you know, the flitting back and forth between time zones, and you know, sometimes on the same page.
Yeah.
Um, and this sort of, I suppose, the I'm thinking of, I have such a crude reading of Christeva and the semiotic, but the poetry of the novel, it stems from Nour, but it stems from being, you know, the son of a mother. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
that,
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
maternal aspect of creativity, not just
Hmm.
creation. And I, yeah, I just thought this is brilliant, and he acknowledges this as well, doesn't he? The character,
Yeah, yeah,
I think towards the end, like kind of not saying that he's emasculated, but he's feminized. That he sees through. He's been seeing through a sort of a Moona shaped glass sort of thing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, I think this there's a very strong, I guess, because of the influence of the empirical method and sort of materialism in general over the last, I don't know, 3 centuries or whatever. There's this very fixed idea that if you're a certain kind of human being, like if you have a particular gender, or if you have a particular, or if you're born into a particular race or whatever, then that sort of dictates your personhood in a way that makes you impenetrable to somebody else. Um, and that's used in both positive and negative ways. I mean, that's sometimes used to justify racist or discriminatory
Yeah,
positions, but it's also used to say like enable diversity and inclusion and own voice and all of this as well. But I think I mean, I really work and function against this in my life, I would say, as much as my work. I feel that I feel that the thrill of being human is precisely the ability to be somebody else,
yeah,
the capacity to be somebody else, and not just to imagine or empathize, but to actually be somebody else in a given situation, right? And so one of the answers to this own voice problem that I had when I decided that the main character was going to be this older woman, and I didn't want it all to be in her voice. I didn't want to just impersonate this woman. Was to deal with this very point, you know, by acknowledging that even my own existence as a writer, it owes itself to this woman who begat me, right, and this woman who shaped me as well, by nurturing me or whatever. And this is precisely also what the country of Egypt does to its children, right? It begets them and nurtures them, and it creates these monsters, but it also creates these beautiful people, in who are at least capable sometimes capable of beauty, right? Or or or
Yeah.
or or the sublime, right? Um, so yeah, so it wasn't so much a sort of feminist intervention as simply an acknowledgement of something that I feel is very, very true at a very deep level, that men exist as men on like the men's existence as men is conditional upon them being women's children, right? Or you know, produced by in this culture in particular. I mean, obviously everywhere in different ways, but I'm talking about this culture in particular,
Yeah.
which seems like on the surface can look very patriarchal and can look very sexist. But actually, once you break the sort of the skin, you realize that it's completely, it's almost like matriarchal. It's almost
Yeah. I
uh,
say more so maybe than British culture from how you're speaking, and I,
yeah.
yeah, I don't see quite the same um, uh, lauding of motherhood here. Maybe
Hmm.
a social marker, but not a social, like socio-political valuation, valuing of motherhood. But that's a
Yeah.
whole other discussion. But yeah,
Yeah, no, no, no,
I think
that's a
when you
completely.
enshrine it in a culture with language as well, and rituals, I think that yeah, we've got something to learn. Maybe I think
Hmm.
from what you're saying. I yeah, I know we've kind of touched on this, but the novel is called The Dissenters, and
Yeah.
dissent is everywhere, as you said, little dissents and bigger forms of dissent and revolution. And for me, this was very much tied into pleasure as well, and like the
Yeah.
sort of erotics of the novel was the erotic at times.
Hmm.
Uh, the power was in these scenes or acts, attempts to have pleasure. Shimo in the attic, which is a memory that Nour recalls, but the whole of Amna's life as well, just these sort of clandestine affairs, and um, I think you did the brilliant sort of liaison she has with the artist,
Hmm.
and you don't you're very some of these scenes are beautiful and sexy, and some of them are hilarious and ridiculous. Particularly that one I thought was brilliant. Where it goes into the abject
Yeah,
very quickly,
it does. Yeah.
yeah, which is fantastic. But you know, pleasure and intimacy and desire. Mouna's name means desire, right? And this is
Muna can mean no. Yeah, can mean desire. Well, not desire. What you long for.
yeah, longing, and
Yeah.
it felt
Which
like
which is yeah.
yeah, I just wanted you to expand more on these acts of dissent and rebellion, maybe on
Hmm.
you're not shy, and I think that's uh not that anyone should be shy when
Yeah,
writing.
yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Yeah.
Like sometimes you read about sex in fiction and it's just cringe, but it also has no place. And here it felt uh, expansive and humorous
Mm.
and very important, very, very important. Going back to politics, very important to the politics of the book. So
Yeah.
to expand more on that for me.
Thank you. That's a lovely segue into several different things. So like the word dissenters, I think the distinction for me was between dissenters and dissidents,
Yeah,
in the sense that I wanted to identify these characters as people who dissent from what's expected of them.
yeah,
Not necessarily in a left wing or dissident way. So, for example, Abid, who is the younger brother, who is this sort of psychopathic intelligence officer, uh, is dissenting from the family. So he's enacting something that's extremely reactionary and extremely sort of status quo, but he's dissenting from his own family, so he's still a dissenter. So almost everybody in the book, like I think, is a dissenter in this sense. And actually, I started out calling it Amna, and then somebody said, you can't just call it that. You have to have like a title, like former agent. So I came up with the dissenters. So this is as far as the word is concerned. Um, I think, I mean, for me, the desire as it manifests in the erotic in particular is something that is completely crucial to to looking at the world and understanding the world and playing with the world. So I've never shied away from that in my writing, and I didn't even become aware of this being a potential problem until I started until my work started getting translated and so I think there is a sort of aversion to dealing with sex or erotics in the Anglophone world for some reason. I don't think that's true in French literature, for example, or
Definitely not.
so it's not across the West. I think it's an Anglophone thing. I think it's a Puritan thing. Um and
It's a
and
Victorian thing that's,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And and so it doesn't really concern me, but at the same time, I don't want it to be understood as me sort of being sexist or uber masculine or whatever, which it has been in some of my Arabic work in translation. There were there were responses like that to some parts of some things. Um, but I mean, in this case, it wasn't a huge issue because it was the standpoint, it was the viewpoint of a woman anyway. So it wasn't going to go into that. Um, but I think that the really interesting thing that the thing that I feel is really interesting about this is that since the sexual revolution in the West, sex has become something that is so sort of bland and uninteresting. The it's like it's almost like a function, and people, as far as I understand, statistically, people are actually having less sex in the West now, which is fascinating. I mean, this could have to do with technology as well, but like the internet and yeah,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
but but I think that the one of the sort of the unintended consequences, positive consequences of people being or pretending to be very prudish and very sort of erotophobic in the Arab world is that sex retains this sort of thrilling quality that is something that's always somewhat forbidden. That's always that you have to be careful to do that. You have to take a risk. And so there's always a risk involved in sex, in this part of the world, and this is something that makes it so much more compelling, right?
Mm.
So this combined with my interest in desire as an aspect of the psyche, as an aspect of how people feel about the world and see themselves in the world, um, uh, was uh, was reason enough, to do things that way and to and to include these scenes. But obviously, I mean, in the way that it can be in life, it can be ridiculous, can be absurd, and it can also be sublime, and it can be very sad, which is, I mean, I particularly like there's a sex scene where uh after he comes out of prison, and I think they're in the attic and they have sex for the first time or something, and it's and to me this scene is extremely sad. It's extremely it's something almost to cry over, but it's, it's to some degree it's sexually explicit. So, um, so yeah, so I mean, this is an aspect of the descent in the sense that again, it's a way for people to affirm and assert their their existence and the existence of their bodies as instruments of pleasure, as instruments of liberation, in an atmosphere that works against that, and 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 sort of deal with the consequences of choosing to do that in a given situation, and to sort of to keep veiling and hiding that and avoiding it in the book would have been very would have seemed, stupid, right? Why would I do that? And yet, I think, I mean, even in Arabic literature now, because it's been commercialized and there are now major prizes, and people don't want to sort of rock the boat. It's I mean this sort of Victorian influence, for lack of a better word, is spreading. So people have sort of less sex and less saucy sex in their books, than they might have, like, maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's very regrettable. One of the most beautiful defenses of sex and writing is Garth Greenwell's,
Oh, yeah,
in I think it was a speech or a podcast or something, but it's also, but obviously in the case of Garth Greenwell, it's different. I mean, it's a different issue because he's talking about gay sex, and he's talking about
yeah,
things like cruising and whatever. But I think there's even more aversion to straight sex that involves like male desire,
yeah,
and I think that's, it's just something we have to live with. I don't think, I think as long as one is respectful of people's autonomy and complexity, I think you can sort of deal with that as well, as you seem to agree, right?
yeah, absolutely. I also think, it's about that there are scenes in your work. It is pleasure, unadulterated pleasure between uh, Amna and Amin
Mhm.
as she's becoming Mouna in his eyes, seeing herself as a attractive woman who has pleasure and can have pleasure as a woman who has also undergone FGM as well.
Yeah.
There's which is really brilliant. And then there's also it's also about knowledge. It's about what the other can open up inside of you.
Mhm.
It's quite that's a very French reading, but it's I think
I mean, this particular aspect of the book for me is very much like the Garden of Eden sort of. I mean, he sort of, but it's reversed. So he sort of tempts her into eating the apple, and then she's cast out, because he ends up in prison. She's by herself, and she can't make ends meet and whatever. And uh, so she becomes this other person. She becomes Nemo, under the influence of her female friends, right? Uh, and then when he comes back, and they lose their connection, they lose their erotic connection. Uh, she becomes this other Mouna, like the Mouna that her children know her as, is almost like the mirror image of the Mouna that she was with him, and they're both aspects of a Mouna, who is blessed by God, right? So the Mouna that she was with him is the Mouna is a Mouna in paradise, and the Mouna that she becomes as a pious mama is a religious woman, right? Is a woman who wants to go to paradise, who has been promised paradise in a certain kind of context, right? So this is the moon. These are the two Munas, right? And Nemo is almost like the conduit between the two. Because at the very end, and this scene was actually added later as an afterthought, partly because of my editor's suggestion, um, where her friend Lena, has done something horrible. She's caused somebody to kill himself, and she tells her, uh, Nemo tells her that, like, if you die, then I might end up being a hagga, I might end up being like this pious mama,
yeah,
which is precisely what happens, right?
yeah,
And then at the very, very end of the book, when the ghost of Lena reappears, she says, I became a hagga because you left, right? So it's, I mean, I think the three characters are really very organically connected. It's part of the creative process and part of the pleasure of the book. I hope that you don't always see that very clearly, but once you're done with the book, you can see that this is really the same person and it's the same story, right?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I love that you brought Lena up. I think she's fantastic. Flighty form of femininity. She's brilliant going around in her sports car. Or it was a sports car in my head. Maybe it wasn't on the.
Mhm. Yeah, well, they
Um,
didn't exist then, I think, but the equivalent.
yeah, 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 some equivalent. And uh, how friends bring out different aspects of us,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
without those relationships, we can really lose a part of ourselves. And like that really struck me. Even though she was also trying to save Lena by saying that she could see what could happen. Um,
yeah.
um, Two more questions. I think we've still got time.
Okay.
The clock is ticking, but I have so many questions left. Um, um, on that note about Lena, actually, that might be a really lovely segue into the jumpers, um, who are just incredible. I just, yeah, they are a separate myth, but they kind of bleed into other sections, and we um, meet some of these women and we hear their accounts that Amna has sort of collated together.
Yeah.
Um, where did this come from? It does feel like there needed to be an eruption anyway, like not just because of the fabric of the book and where the narrative was heading, but because of the political changes and how that impacts individuals anyway. But it felt like, something needed to implode. And so the jumpers, for anyone who hasn't read the novel, women who usually jump out of windows or jump off of roofs. And Amna thinks it's because of patriarchy, something to do with
Mhm.
the Muslim Brotherhood, and things that are going on politically. But Nour is not so sure. Like, he acknowledges the patriarchal element, but some of these things are just inexplicable. We don't fully know why. It's like they've been not possessed, but something has, some frenzy has led them to go into a trance and jump off roofs. And I just, where did this come from? What was the idea? What gave you the idea
Well,
for
I
it?
think the idea was a sort of the obverse of activism,
Yeah.
the notion that if you think of activism as a male act, as something that sort of penetrates the world, goes into the world in an aggressive way and tries to change it. I think the female equivalent to that, and that doesn't imply that everybody who does the male thing has to be a man or vice versa, obviously, but like as a position on life, And then there's the female thing. I mean, this is obviously in the context of Egypt, right? Which sort of makes up for that, which understands that there's only so much we can do, that we can't really change the world, not in that way, and not so aggressively and not so fast and not so arrogantly, right? And they just want to maintain life. They want to keep people alive. They want to keep people uh, cared for, etc., etc., which is what Mouna does for her children most of the time, as opposed to what Amin does, who, I mean, first he's missing for however long, and then he's not involved. Right? He doesn't do anything, which
Absent.
is the yeah, he's which is the story of like 99% of the, I mean, at least that generation of Egyptian men I know, right? Of Egyptian families. Um, So, but of course, in this case, if the male element, as in the activists, are being killed or being jailed or whatever, what would the female do? In a situation that's completely hopeless. Like there's nothing that can sort of change the historical. situation, right? Uh, so so it's almost like this mystical, transcendent
Yeah.
thing that happens to them whereby killing themselves in this way, and not really not consciously killing themselves, but just enacting despair in this way, they're actually somehow saving the country or saving society. Or I mean, this was the idea in my head. Where it came from, I don't know where it came from. I think it came from. I mean, the image of a woman jumping out of a window
Yeah.
is a very potent thing for me, and it and it sort of recurred throughout my life in various forms. I think the earliest example was Adwa Saleh, who is this iconic figure of sort of Marxist feminist 70s generation, student movement generation activism. And she was very, very deeply let down by her comrades and by life in general. And she jumped out of the balcony of her relative's apartment at a fairly young age, some 40 something, in 97. And I heard about that in 97 because there were friends in common. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, on one hand, there's the image that is very powerful to me, a very powerful statement, And on the other hand, there's this idea of sort of femaleness or womanhood or whatever you want to call it, making up for male violence in a certain kind of way, right? If I mean that's a huge oversimplification, but
Yeah. It's just fascinating for me. I wrote something that never got published, which is good, about women falling from roofs and windows. So it was fascinating. It was more about women in the arts, like Yayoi Kusama has
Mhm.
was pushed out of a window, but also attempted, her life to take her life by jumping out of a window as well. And all these sort of examples, just Louise Bourgeois thinking about falling as an art form, but also the dire consequences of falling. Its closeness to flying, but then the inevitable conclusion is death because you can't fly, and the weight of the body as well for a woman particularly. Um, who thinks they can fly on that initial jump, but will inevitably suffer the consequences of gravity. Just when reading your jumpers, I just thought this is incredible, and I I did scour the internet to see if like they were real, even though you're
And
about.
a lot of people, I mean, actually, Will and my American editor Annie
Yeah,
Lee uh, both asked whether this was like an actual phenomenon,
yeah,
and in a way, this was very reassuring, that it was so convincing. But no, I mean, it wasn't actual phenomenon
it
at
was
all.
really convincing, and
It
it
was, yeah,
it shouldn't be obviously it, not everything in your novel has to have a real life counterpart. And I think you've written about that expectation, that pressure put on uh, writers from, Arabic speaking countries in particular, with, English speaking editors and publishers and
Mhm.
whatnot. No way, you know, would I expect that? But they were so convincing, and it just thought, is there a precedent? Is there a history behind this? Because it did it, yeah, it's a very potent symbol as well, as despite it being horrific, very
Mm.
potent symbol. So
Yeah,
I could totally understand why other people were so, like, I was Googling away all different searches trying
yeah,
to.
but it was actually really surprising for me because it's so obvious to me that they're not real. That
Yeah,
it, yeah, I mean, for people
it's
to,
called the myth as well, the myth of the jumper.
yeah, yeah, but surprising in a very good way, in a very positive way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic. I wanted to talk about. Well, I had two questions. Really, one about legacy, and this is you've already touched on issues of legacy and what um, Amna's children inherit. Which is a mixed bag when it
yeah,
comes to your family and your parents in particular. And there's she I think Nour says to Shimo, you wouldn't, you're very much like her. You wouldn't have, you
yeah,
know, done what you eventually do, you wouldn't have led the life that you live without her having,
Absolutely, yeah.
you know. But at the same time, there's trauma. There's other issues that are inherited, and I just, it struck me like, what do you want me to take away from this novel? What would you like, Egyptian women to take away from this novel? What, they may be very different things actually, but and I know it's not for the writer to be like, take this away, but it is about a novel that is about inheritance and reflecting on what we take away and what we do with what our ancestors, what our parents, what our family, what, people we know give us. So yeah, I wondered.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. It's an almost impossible question for me, but uh, but I will say that what I've missed the most in Egypt in particular, but in the world at large as well, is people sort of willingly and peacefully confronting the truth, their truth, the truth of where they come from, and that doesn't mean, as it so often does in sort of left-wing Western activism, completely discrediting or completely sort of being against your whole existence or saying that, which is obviously which then becomes a different kind of untruth because you can't sort of eliminate yourself, right? And so I think what I would like people to take away from the book is um as the suggestion of the possibility of facing the truth in a generative and merciful merciful would be the word in a merciful way, as opposed to using the truth to kind of demonize or eliminate a, a particular aspect of yourself or a particular group, whether you're on the right side or the wrong side. It's not That's not the issue. But but I think that the truth in all its complexity will eventually, or has to eventually, light the way somehow. And I think that would be my hope. As for Egyptian women in particular, I mean, I think I think just for them to see how sort of grateful and humble I am, um, and how much I, and hopefully a lot of other men, uh, acknowledge that particular legacy, and again in both ways. So we're fucked up because of you, but but we're also sublime because of you. That this is where we come from, and as men, and so maybe the way forward isn't sort of positing this feminist clash between the genders or sexes or whatever, but to actually just acknowledge that we're interlinked in a very deep way, in a very organic way, and that there's no way out of this connection. Uh, and so facing the truth or assimilating the truth is necessary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I swore. I wasn't.
No, no, don't. You
Is
had to make a
is
thing
that
here.
okay with?
She
Yeah.
was she was swearing left, right, and centre. The best writers do. It's okay. Um, I so in my introduction, I talked about how you're a literary translator, you're a poet, you're a cultural journalist. This is from your website. You're a
Mhm.
teacher, you're a photographer. I've seen some of your photographs. They're fantastic. They
Okay.
really
Thank you.
remind me actually of Amna, Nimo, Mouna, in that
Yeah.
things are sort of shifting. They're not never one thing that you're
Hmm.
capturing. I imagine Cairo. moving, and and multiple things happening at once, and it's really, really powerful. You're a man of many things, just like your character, and I wanted to go back to Descent and how you've written this fantastic narrative that is the fabric of which is also of dissent. It's got multiple strands, as I said. It's got multiple narrative uh viewpoints. It's got Egyptian, Arabic dialect and words, and you're not going to translate them, which I think is fantastic, because I think sometimes people need to do the work, and it's also not about pandering to, you know, Western readers. And you've got French in there. You've there's so much. It's a confluence of of things, themes, issues, facets. It's fantastic, and I just, I wondered if you, yeah, if you'd consider yourself an artistic literary dissenter too, and whether this is the only way you can work. You have to let the writing take you where it wants to go, just like you had to kind of let go of, you couldn't write a sort of representation of your mother. You had to let
Mhm.
the character develop and allow that to be somewhere. As a palimpsest, it's
Yeah.
there somewhere, but it had to, the writing had to take over. And so I wondered if this is conscious, or whether this is, you know just you allowing everything to come out on the page.
It's an amazing question. I think it's very true that I have been a dissenter, and I think in some ways I've paid the price. So I haven't even, I mean, I hadn't decided whether I was writing in, I mean, I still haven't decided whether I'm writing in Arabic or English, and I don't know if I write fiction or non-fiction, and I keep sort of flitting between these forms and these possibilities in my life, which seems to go against the grain of how things function in the world today. I mean, I think in the past, I mean, at least in the distant past, people would be able to do a range of different things, and still be appreciated for being, whatever. I think my career has suffered a little bit because I never uh, stuck with one thing, uh, or one way of doing things. Uh, but I really think that's just temperamental. I mean, I don't think I can function in any other way. And also, having said that, I think ultimately I only really have two or three themes that are dictated by my identity, my personhood. And one of those themes is obviously being from this part of the world, at this moment in history, and the sort of the many sort of difficulties and horrors that this implies, and also the conflict, the inner conflict that when you're born into a world that you really want to be part of, but that was not forged by your ancestors. It was forged by people who mostly look down on you,
Yeah.
right? And you want to be part of this world, and in some ways you can, but in other ways you can't. And no matter what you do, etc., etc. So I think this is one theme, and another theme is desire, which you can see in the book. Um, and I think I've just at different points, depending on my situation, my very sort of mundane situation, but also my state of mind, I have pursued those same themes in a very wide range of ways, right? And I think maybe ultimately, if somebody, looks at everything I've done, they'll be able to see the connections and the coherence. Um, but um, but I know people, like I know fellow Egyptian novelists, for example, from my generation, who every other year, sometimes whatever, sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes a shorter time. They produce a novel, and they're evolving, and these are people I deeply respect, but I could never do that. I mean, it would have to be in a different language, or it would have to be like a completely different project, or it would have to be a different genre. I mean, if I've done it once, I can't sort of do it again. And as I say, I mean, I've accepted the fact that this has a price, that you don't you're not celebrated, you're not taken as seriously just because you don't sort of persist in one direction. Uh yeah, so in this sense, I'm definitely a dissenter, and also in the sense that I think uh I don't know if this has to do with my being a journalist. I mean, I wasn't really I was only a cultural journalist,
Mm.
which was wonderful because it exposed me to all kinds of figures and forms and whatever, and that I could then write about. And I think a lot of my essay writing abilities were had their genesis in that time. So I've written about music, I've written about film, I've written about things like that. Um, but but I also tend to I have this very sort of hypercritical stance on everything. So I think for me, and this is politically, or can be politically, very tricky. Um, if you're critical of X, you have to be pro Y. Like you like if X and Y are in competition and you're critical of X, it's naturally assumed that you're pro Y. But that's never been the case for me. I mean, I've always been I've always been critical of both X and Y, and people sometimes don't like that. People because sometimes they expect you to be positive about Y because they like Y, and then they realize that not just because you're critical of X, are you going to, or they feel that engagement and having a civic or a historical sense of responsibility demands that you have clear views and positive views, that you have to support, you have to have a candidate, you have to have a party, you have to have whatever. But I think that my role, and I think the role of the writer, as I understand it, is to question all of that,
Yeah,
is to be the person who just sows doubt
yeah,
over everything in a convincing way, right?
absolutely. Interrogate language and
Mm.
the realities behind it. And I think you do that brilliantly. And I also think, being all these things at once, the world may not celebrate it, or, a publisher may not know where to market you,
Mhm.
but it makes your work so much richer for having touched all these other things and opened yourself to other ways of doing and being and seeing. I really, really do believe that. And I think most creatives, I was talking about this with another writer, it, you know, they push their creativity in one direction and never really, explore whether it could go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And you've you've done that, and that's
Mm.
brave and really important. And I think more people should do it. It comes as you say, at a cost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't know. Had I realized that that this is the way the world works, I don't know whether I would have done it. But it just happened that way. And yeah. And I mean, I don't know if it makes my work richer. I mean, I'm really happy that you think so, but it definitely makes it more compelling to me. It makes it worth doing in a way that it wouldn't be if I was doing the same thing over and over.
I definitely think everything, you know, things feed into other
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Cannot use myself as a comparison, but I will at the same time. Like, I draw and I write, and may not be at a particular stage uh, with either of those things in my life, but they definitely feed each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I learn about them from each other as well. And I think I think it's really important that you've inhabited all these different
Mm.
roles, and I do, and you've still got 4 books, so like that's no small thing, my friend.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that's a really prolific, brilliant output, and you're still writing. So I think there's more to come. There's so much more to come.
Yeah, hope
Yeah,
so.
I feel like there are the seeds for. I assume the seeds for the next book are somewhere in the Dissenters, even if it's something very different. I just feel like it's such a rich book that there must
Yeah,
be.
I mean the seeds for the next fiction project are kind of there, but even though, as you say, it's not, it's more sort of speculative, it's more fantastical. But I mean, this is an opportunity to plug it shamelessly. So I will. My book of essays called Post-Muslim, which is a very deep personal reflection on what it has meant to be a Muslim in my time in this part of the world, and a Muslim as in, I mean, not necessarily a practicing or a, I mean, a Muslim in the sense of being born Muslim in the very wide sort of historical um sense of that identity, and this should be coming out next year in the autumn, I think. Uh, so yeah, I have sort of high hopes for that because it also obviously engages with the what's been happening in Palestine, which kind of started halfway through as I was working on it. So it engages with this idea of being in the world and wanting to be in the world, but not of it.
Yeah.
The modern world, the West dominated world, the white world, whatever you want to call it. So you are in that world and you don't have a problem with that world. Uh, but that world sort of insists that you should have a problem with yourself,
Mm.
that you should hate yourself, that you should want yourself not to exist. You know? And uh, and this is very much, I think, the Muslim experience in the 21st century, like the secular, enlightened, whatever Muslim experience. Um, yeah, so this is my shameless plug. Post-Muslim school.
Not shameful at all.
Mm.
Brilliant, brilliant. I can't wait to read it. And will try and get a copy from your editor. But
Of course, yeah.
I can't thank you enough. This has been really brilliant to talk with you. I think I could have carried on talking for another hour with you, but we have
Absolutely, yeah.
to start.
Thank you, thank you. It's
That's
yeah,
a
it's
brilliant.
I'm really grateful for your engagement with the book, and it's very cheering and positive to hear you say these things and to talk with you. Yeah.
Always. Thank you, Youssef. A huge thank you to Peninsula Press, particularly editor and writer Will Rees for helping to set this talk up. Massive thank you to Kath and Emily and Renee at Fane. You've been watching a Fane online talk. Thank you for joining us. And please go out and purchase The Dissenters, whether it be from Fane's website or Peninsula Press's website. Thank you very much and have a good evening.